Welcome back to Sunrise Daily, where we're focusing on the economy today, and in the light of the recession, what can be done to get us out of this? And we'll be starting with our guest, who is in Abuja, Markwe.
Thank you so much, Chamberlain. Indeed, I have with me the Minister of Finance, Mrs. Kemi Adeosun. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Morning.
Well, I'm sure you've seen the dailies now. I mean, everyone's going on about the economy. This day has this. Saraki, Senate's mandate this session is economy, economy, economy. If you had to face the National Assembly, because I assume that when they resume, they will definitely be calling on the ministers to talk about the economy. You did brief them just before the Senate went on recess. What would you be telling them has changed since your last discussion with them?
Right. Good morning, firstly. I think that the biggest change, of course, has been that then we were anticipating that we would move officially into recession. I think that was where I first said that technically I think we're in recession, and that was later confirmed by the NBS statistics. Now, we had been in negative growth really since 2012. There'd been a slowdown, and we were hoping that we would avoid recession, but we're there now. What does that mean in terms of our tactical plans? Our plans were always the same, and our plans haven't changed. That is, we need to stimulate this economy, and we're going to do so largely by redirecting expenditure from recurrent into capital, because we believe that capital expenditure will create jobs and will create more productivity in the economy in the long run and help us to diversify. So my message will be nothing has changed in terms of strategy and plan. Clearly, we need to look at other scenarios, and when we did our planning, we did, the best case scenario, the most likely scenario, and the worst case scenario. So we had planned that, look, if this happens, we will have to change our funding mix, and that's really what we're looking at now with asset realizations, as well as to supplement the money that we can raise in debt. But the overall strategy, the overall solution to the Nigerian problem hasn't changed. That is, we've got to make this economy more productive, we've got to create more jobs, and to do so, we've got to invest in our capital infrastructure.
There were talks about, the executive arm of government sending an executive bill talking about president's emergency powers to help, drag out the economy from a recession. Are you privy to that bill?
Well, I'm not privy to the bill, but I'm privy to the thinking behind it. And what I would say is that there are a number of bottlenecks that we have already identified that we think, given where we are, it might be worth looking at how we unlock them. And let me give an example. We've pumped fairly large amounts of capital into the economy through various ministries, departments and agencies, some of whom have deployed it very quickly and are ready for more. And we're about to release another tranche of 350 billion. In fact, we concluded that meeting yesterday to allocate that money. But there are some ministries that have been slowed down, mired in the procurement processes. Now, it's about transparency versus speed. We want transparency, we want open tenders, because that gives us the best price, and that's what also gives opportunities to Nigerians to bid for and to get government contracts. But if it's taking 12 weeks, 16 weeks to get through the bureaucracy, at this point in time we feel we can't afford those delays, so we need to maybe look and say, look, procurement laws were made for usual times, these are unusual times, can we consider temporarily relaxing some of the conditions? And similarly, there's a transaction that we're all working on at the moment, which is a very pivotal transaction with General Electric, GE, that they want to run freight on our old rail system, which would create huge numbers of jobs across the country. But it's bogged down in rules that say you've got to do this, and then you've got to advertise and keep it open for a year. We don't have that time. So there are some areas where I think it would be useful to have some legislative amendment.
Over the weekend, we did hear the CBN governor talk about how the worst of the recession is over. Do you buy that?
I do, to the extent that, in terms of we've had problems with oil price, and then just when we thought that things couldn't get any worse, we started having problems in the Niger Delta. So we now have problems with oil quantity. It's very difficult to see what else can go wrong. So almost our worst case scenario in terms of our planning has already happened. I think that's probably what he was trying to say. That from now on, the only way really is up. The only way really is recovery. The only way really is forward. When we started, you do these scenarios and you say, well, what can go wrong? If you look at where we are now, everything The oil price is low, the oil quantity is low, we're in recession.
You don't think that the oil
up.
prices can get any lower? I mean, when you look at what we did know that, you know, there were very, very conservative figures in terms of the benchmark that was projected for oil prices. But then we're looking at 2.2 million barrels per day. We understood that at some point we were doing just about a million, about half of that. And yet we say that it cannot get any worse. What did
the oil price? I don't think the oil price has bottomed out. If you look at the oil price, it's global, okay, and it's driven by global factors. And indeed, speaking of the oil price, that's one of the things I think when we look back and say, how did we get here? That's one of the signals I think we missed. In 2010, when the oil price was 110, the Americans did something very significant. They allowed exploration onshore, fracking, and created the shale oil industry. At that point, they were producing 5.2 million barrels of oil a day in America, and they were the biggest buyer of oil in the world. They signaled to the world, we're not going to buy oil anymore. We are going to become self-sufficient. They began to explore oil in America. It was obvious they were going to drive down the oil price. Those were really the signals that I think we missed.
And the quantity?
Well, they're now at 10 million barrels of oil a day.
I'm talking about our quantity.
Well, our quantity at the moment can only go upwards, and we hope that with the work, the engagement that's happening in the Niger Delta, that we can get back up to where we need to be. That's critical to what we're doing. We do need to get the quantity back up because the price is low. And for us to be able to fund our budget and for us to be able to stimulate the economy, for state governments to be able to pay salaries, and indeed for federal government to be able to meet its obligations, there's a certain minimum level of sort of oil revenue that we just need, and that's reality. And I think government has accepted that, and we're working towards ensuring we achieve that.
Well, we'll go to Lagos now.
Rate cuts being the way out of this recession, and you want the CBN to lower interest rates. How do you plan doing this? Because, I mean, the CBN, they've talked about this several times, how, in fact, experts expect them to maintain the MPR at the same level this July. How do you plan to ensure that this happens?
Well, as you know, good morning. As you know, the CBN are fully independent of the Ministry of Finance, and the MPR, independent economists the MPC, sorry, the Monetary Policy Committee, the independent economists that look at monetary policy, are indeed meeting today. My position has been that, look, this government is trying to spend its way out of trouble, and that spending, much of it, is being borrowed. So if you increase the interest rate, it increases our costs of debt service. So in an ideal world, I need lower interest rates. I think business, when you're in a recession, typically you cut interest rates to stimulate activity. So we would love to see the MPC consider how they can help us lower interest rates, because we think in terms of business activity that will deliver greater results to Nigeria. And I do understand what they were trying to do, which was they're trying to manage inflation. But if you actually look at the structural nature of the inflation, it's unlikely to really respond to monetary policy initiatives. It's structural inflation that's caused largely by the pass-through of costs from the exchange rate movement. So I think there's a strong argument. I'm sure that debate is going on within the Monetary Policy Committee as to how we can bring the interest rates.
How much would you be looking at? I mean, if you wanted to come down, what rate would you say will be ideal for you? Well,
you see, the thing is that the interest rates are driven largely, indeed, and this is one of the problems we inherited, by government borrowing. Government borrowing is extremely attractive for banks to do, and for as long as government is always the risk-free, government is the cheapest borrowing, and everybody else borrows at a premium to that. Now, when government is borrowing heavily, which is what we're doing, we've got to be very careful, because we'll be driving up the interest rate. So, I mean, my ideal rate, I won't give you that figure, but we'd like the interest rates to come back down. We know that while inflation is high, you can't, there's a relationship between interest rates and inflation. So I can understand what they're trying to do. But I think from a fiscal perspective, we need lower interest rates.
In the realm of single digits?
Ultimately, that's where I think Nigeria will get to. I think if we continue with the economic strategy that we have, that's certainly where we see Nigeria getting to, and it can happen. It needs a concerted effort, and we need to be more productive in the economy and drive out some of the structural things that keep interest rates high. But I think it's attainable in the medium term.